The harem is one of the oldest institutions that has survived to this day. However, the Turkish harem differed from the Arab zenana, because it was influenced by Byzantine culture. The Ottoman harem was simple as long as the Turks lived on the steppe, so it was short time, although it took a lot from the steppe. He was different from zenana also because he came from the steppe culture, so women of blood had a huge position. They didn't have to sneak around dark alleys. The Russian harem is a Tiram, in fact it disappeared recently. He also grew out of Byzantium. There is a common belief that one can only be unhappy in this place, but this is not true. Kosem was right when she ridiculed a European noblewoman who asked her a very inappropriate question about her bad experiences with Yasir, directly implying that she was an unhappy prisoner because of it. The famous answer of the most powerful and cruel since Theodora Vliday is true. I'm not unhappy. Do you know who you're talking to? Only in this system, by doing such a useless, thoughtless thing as having children can you become the most powerful man in the world. The sultana's laughter when she heard the question echoed throughout the palace, and the court was terrified because it did not know what it was about. Kosem had never laughed so much. This shows how poor knowledge about this institution has been for centuries. All three of these institutions functioned the same, so we will discuss the most popular Turkish harem and use these terms as the most famous ones. Not much could have changed in these institutions for a simple reason. The Khagans of Great Russia. They are also called Khagans, and only after Ivan the Terrible are called czars and sultans. For political reasons, are happy to marry women from Byzantine families, and these families do not want to lose their influence on politics. Inevitably, these women force the lifestyle they knew in the new place. Mehmed II was the last ruler before Suleiman to marry a free woman. Harem was liberated, an act of law to raise her status, but it was not really necessary. When a son was born, Khaden became free, but theoretically they had to obey their sons in the future. In practice, the world is spread out at a woman's feet, so no one treats their mothers like slaves, quite the opposite. Try to oppose your mother-in-law from your husband's side, in this part of the world. You'll end up badly. It is therefore not surprising that these women, despite the existence of cruel dynastic law, are interested in having sons. The most valuable women in the harem are Circassians. A lullaby sung by representatives of this nation has survived to this day. May you live in prosperity, gold dripping from the walls, just like in the Sultan's palace. Women with very fair skin and dark hair, with very cold personalities, were considered the best candidates for the ruler's Haseki. Well, since early Slavs really were considered cheap people, including their women. At least this popularity was never about beauty. This myth also prevails in Western countries. Undemanding and not having excessive needs. Women of this origin are slowly starting to understand that it is not worth being cheap, but in fact, in the times of socialism, many did everything to leave their grey countries, which greatly spoiled the opinion in erotic matters of other women from their countries who have a healthier approach to life. However, these are only a few examples, but as is often the case, these few often form the opinion of the majority abroad. It's hard to beat the lack of German beauty, but in every nation there are pretty and ugly ones. Depriving a Muslim woman of her liberty was a punishable act, which is why most Haseki and later Vliday decided to convert to Islam. Western countries, even those that had colonies, never tried to understand this part of the world. They didn't need it anyway. They were just fools to be exploited. Colonialism has functioned this way for centuries and not much has changed in this matter, although colonialism is carried out in a slightly different way. The conquest of countries is done in a different way: goods, a stronger currency, the destruction of the labor market so that they come to us to work below their skills, military cooperation. The West has always had trouble understanding some wedding rules, such as the traditional bashlik bride price. To this day you can hear that it is human trafficking. In fact, it is a dowry from the husband to the wife, which constitutes her security in the event of divorce or the husband's death. For many centuries, women in the West were left with nothing after the death of their spouse, and in fact most are still left with nothing, because people are simply unable to earn enough to save anything. Even in rich countries, child support payments are sometimes so low that women are forced to engage in prostitution to support their children. Many have to earn extra money like that when fathers disappears and alimony cannot be collected. Eunuchs have played an important role in the life of the harem since Byzantine times. The word kaislaga is sacred. He is the one who conveys orders and information from the padishah. He takes the kadina to meet the padishah and sometimes even chooses her. On the orders of the valide, or for a bribe from some minister who gave a woman to the ruler in order to have her as a spy. This is how harem started her career, but she rebelled against Ibrahim's will. In Byzantium, eunuchs played other, much more important roles. They were even army commanders and ministers, such as Narses and Solomon. These functions were taken away from eunuchs during Ottoman rule, but they continued to influence politics. Especially when came Kafe's era. Some of them actually married odalisques from the harem. The story of Sümbül Aga is not made up. Until the 16th century, these were white men, but then they were African, post-Saharan, so black men. They should to have unsightly facial features. The more damaged someone is, the better. This was supposed to prevent women from having relationships with eunuchs, but it didn't work very well. We are talking about women's homes where incomplete castration took place, so the men were fully functional and the only thing they could not do was impregnate. And that many forget after 2 weeks to a month after castration, because the sperm remains in a known place. People are often surprised that they let their cat outside the day after castration and nothing has changed, because nothing has changed, but they rarely talk about it in biology classes, even though they should. The hormones need to subside and the urethra needs to empty. This applies to all mammals. We have to speak in general terms, because that sight work is at work. This is not a Chinese harem, where everything was cut. The harem in Topkapi was established in 1578, during the reign of Murad III. This does not mean, however, that the legendary harem did not live with the ruler. Suleiman had no more women after marrying harem. He voluntarily chose monogamy. Harem was Suleiman's regent for 10 years. Of course, with breaks. She could have occupied Hafsa's former premises. Valide Sultan always has apartments in the main palace, right next to the ruler. Scenes from movies where the valide leaves the harem and everyone kneels in front of her are impressive, but in reality the valide visited these women, spent time there having fun, especially during the holidays, but it was as frequent as the sultan's visit, which is very rare. In fact, the women who made history were either Greeks from the old Basilis families, or well-educated prepared for power, gifts of the chosen ones from the beys, who often got out of control. Moreover, the previous building of the harem actually burned down and the women moved to Topkapı, because the building was seriously damaged. Then the division into Eski Sarai and Topkapi arises. From the time of Murad III, it will officially be a palace where the previous ruler's unwanted women will go. Therefore, what can be read on the internet is not true, that harem forced Suleiman to live together. Suleiman couldn't be forced to do anything. The transfer of the harem began in the same way as the transfer of the capital of the papacy from the Lateran to St. Peter's Basilica, by fire. In 1853, Dolmabahce took over the role of the harem. The first buildings were the Kaislaga's apartment, a mosque and a school where newly arrived women were educated. The school had to be located outside the buildings inhabited by women, because teachers came from outside. When entering the harem, women learned the principles of Islam and Islamic culture, but they also attended lessons in reading, calligraphy, writing poetry, sewing, embroidery, the basics of governance, palace etiquette, and history. Country, and, interestingly, erotic art, the latter is what today's Tunisians deal with. In fact, the peoples living in these areas in the empire serve only this purpose. Of course, we select the region here, because the concept of Tunisia did not exist at that time. There are 30 bathhouses in Topkapi. Few of them have survived. It was a place of relaxation and meetings, including sexual ones. The Kadins and Padishah met there, but lesbian relationships between the Kandins were also established. The harem rooms were heated in the same way as Roman baths. Through cracks in the walls, warm air spread from boilers located in the basement. So it's not entirely true that people were freezing here. This heating system was very popular in the East. It disappeared in Europe, but returned during the Crusades thanks to the knightly orders that were the first to use heating systems in their castles. The number of women in both Porta and Byzantium indicated the ruler's status. That's why there was always more than needed. People has believed too much in the imaginations of authors such as de Chaudet, who had no idea about the harem, but they described it. Most of these women had never met the ruler. Much of it was used for political alliances and given to beys or ambassadors of neighboring countries. Especially the so-called odalisques, i.e. in reality, the cleaning women never met the ruler, although this word, in fact downright offensive to the ruler's women, has become entrenched in languages to describe women from the harem. Some of the women were taken over by Sanjak princes into their harems, but when the Sanjak system disappeared, the number of women changed. The most important woman in the harem before the Haseki era was the Baskadan, literally, the head of the woman. Most often, it is the mother of several sons and the ruler's favorite woman, but this was not the rule. The rule is actually her position in the harem, her political base, built thanks to the number of sons. Later it will be Haseki. Naturally, the one who had the most of them was considered the future Valide. The official first Valida is Hafsa, but in fact Gulbahar Hatun, not Mahidevran Gulbahar, or Amin Gulbahar had influence at the court. A harem is a huge institution that can be compared to an enterprise. The Ottoman harem was a simple institution for as long as the Turks lived on the steppe. It was very short time. Women have a lot to do here. The harem must be managed, and this is the responsibility of the USTA or Khalfa, who takes care of the harem's finances and discipline. This is the second person after Kaiswega. The USTA can be recognized by its clothing and its distinctive long cane. The functions of treasurers include former favorites of the ruler and concubines. Women loyal to him. 5 of them have keys that open all rooms, including the treasury. They are responsible only to the ruler. They record the birth of children in the harem, as well as the names of women who pass through the gate and change their status. Let us remember that the harem system is the same as in Japan and Korea. People change their names. A different name is given on the day of birth, a different name after finishing school, achievements at work, becoming a parent or some other important life event, a different name after marriage, a different name after death. For unknown reasons, probably towards the modern propaganda of world, the series shows that mothers feed their children with breast. Of course, women who were not bored with the ruler did not do this, and the palace was visited by employed wet nurses with their children, or by the wife of some dignitary. Breastfeeding here too was reserved for the peasantry. Sometimes a woman with ample breasts was permanently employed as a wet nurse, and lactation was also artificially induced. This woman literally played the role of a cash cow, but she could count on a large pension. There is a kitchen, a bathhouse, a laundry room, and toilets on the ground floor, and a bedroom for hundreds of girls on the first floor, followed by rooms for the main cadans and Haseki. Unfortunately, these women have to fold and unfold their beds every day. To this day, Turks do not appreciate the comfort of a huge bed. Homes most often have a corner sofa. The bed small, tucked into a corner. This changes among the oligarchs, but not among ordinary society. Kurays play an important role in the life of the harem. Shopping on behalf of women. In fact, they often resell products to them at a much inflated price. They are mainly Jewish women. And it's safe to say that they're making a fortune by cheating these women on prices. A harem cannot function without a doctor and a midwife. Both of these people are female. A male doctor was called to a female patient, which sometimes occurred when the local doctor's expertise failed. He couldn't touch the patient. Women were leaving the harem. They could go out in the city accompanied with kurays, with face covered. Valide Sultan does not have to cover his face. The ruler went to his summer residence, Tiram or Dolmabahce, once a year, and often took his harem with him. There were also trips outside the palace in groups, due to the number of people. Earlier, however, in the place where this specific picnic was to take place, the Yenicheri had set up tents so that no stranger could see the women. The carriages moved according to hierarchy. In the convoy, Valide and Haseki haremagas rode on either side of the carriage, ready to fight in their defense. Contrary to appearances, this carriage was traveling at the end, not the beginning. Over time, small palaces for women were built in the Kiaithane area, where these picnics were most often held, so that there was no need to set up tents. Cruises were also popular. In the gardens of the harem there were swings and carousels for the ruler's children. The sons will stay here until they are 12 years old, and then they will be under the care of their father, and in time they will take over the sanjak. Since the times of Kosem, a much worse fate has awaited them. It is worth remembering this number, because when marrying a Muslim, you have to take into account that from the age of 12, women have no influence on the upbringing of their sons. What Western women forget about in mixed marriages. I'll be cruel, but it also has its advantages. Men should engage in men's activities. They should get knowledge how to screw a screw into a wall, and not crochet, although now people say otherwise. Some women, especially those showing the Jocasta syndrome, are unable to raise their son well and prepare him to enter the world of adulthood, especially when it comes to later issues of establishing relationships. These men are unable to form a relationship. They are literally looking for a slave and want to live in a threesome with their mother. Cutting off the mother, especially in such situations, is a necessity. Jocasta syndrome can lead to many more serious misfortunes. Let us now consider the title sultan, which is used for women at this court. The ruler is called padishah. Times have changed. These are no longer Seljuks. Unfortunately, most people have no idea about this. Once, when I was sending a book to a publisher, I was even accused of calling a woman by that title and not use word queen. This title is equivalent to someone who is a queen, although she can also be a blood princess. She may have more power than the queen. The title of sultan is given to the mother, sister, daughter and other women related to the ruler. Unlike Western Christianity, which would like to bind a woman's legs, considering sex a sin, and the Reformation actually deepened this. They were not saints in history, nor even though they want to present themselves as such. Freemasonism brought freedom to Western women. Eastern Christianity and Islam have never had anything against sexual relations. Widows with children had a higher status than virgins, for a simple reason: there was certainty of reproduction. This has actually changed recently, and European colonialism is largely to blame for this. The Muslim Kama Sutra is a garden of fragrant delights, which also describes positions from the famous Turin papyrus. This is the art of sex, definitely more sublime and much more interesting than the hackneyed Kama Sutra that reigns in Europe, which has not even fully become the basis of the poor sexual life of the West, which no longer knows what to come up with in this matter after receiving more freedoms in these matters. And all what is need to do is reach for the sources. Popularly called Nafzui, after the name of the author of the book. However, it does not beat Chinese plum blossom or Japanese shunga. Indeed, if someone experiences pleasure with an Asian, he will not like anything else. This is the pinnacle of the art of seduction and eroticism. Women do not walk naturally with hairs everywhere, as is unfortunately fashionable in Europe today. They leave hair only on the head. It is a myth that pubic hair protects against something, although you can read such nonsense on the internet. It's a hypertrichotic relic and nothing more. To the depilation uses oda, a substance containing arsenic, which is scraped off with the sharp edge of a clam. The hair was removed along with the bulbs to prevent it from growing back too quickly. If the ruler wanted to meet the entire family, he called his haseki, kaidani, sons and princesses to his apartments. Such meetings took place mainly on the occasion of holidays and are known as havat. Strangely enough, the Ottoman dynasty forgot forever about the invention of the Byzantine fork and knife. People ate mainly with their hands. Trays with food are placed on high marble shelves or puffs, which are used for sitting during the day. Valide ate alone, served by maids and servants. Since Nakshidil, Empress Josephine's cousin, the knife and fork returned. 2 meals a day were served, which were actually a multi-hour feast. Officially, there are no alcoholic drinks, but every woman knows how to prepare raki. Topkapi has 20 kitchens with 150 chefs. An interesting feature are dishcloths embroidered with gold. If you're looking for comfortable beds, there aren't any either. They were created late, at the end of the Sultanate. Unfortunately, even for validas, the sofa had to be unfolded, and the odalisques had to unfold mattresses. Hence, in Russian and its derivatives, carpet means sofa. The power of the Validae and the council was enormous, and they sat on couches, and so the term for the government of the Ottoman dynasty survived in another language as a term for furniture. As a porphyrogenetician, the future prince was born in an apartment whose walls were lined with red material or red marble, his bedding was also red, and the birthing utensils were made of silver or gold. Women gave birth in a special chair with a hole in it, not lying, which is actually an unnatural position and perhaps comfortable for the doctor, but not for the woman giving birth, and it significantly prolonged labor. It was a festival like in Versailles, because an orchestra played during the birth. The news about the birth of the child was delivered by the Kaislage. A sacrifice was made of 5 rams, a boy, 3 handsade, and there were also the same number of cannon shots. Immediately, of course, the ruler's sisters and other cadans came to see the child and congratulate him. Marrying the daughter or relative of a padishah was an ennoblement, but it had consequences because it obliged one to give up polygamy. Marrying a sultana meant coming to terms with the rules of palace life and the threat of laying one's head under the axe or meeting a chavish. Sultanas accompanied their husbands when they were sent to the provinces, but the sons born from such a relationship had to disappear. The law has been changed since the time of Selim Sarayi. It is worth recalling that when the court finally understood who Kosem was, they considered the possibility of placing a descendant of Selim's daughter Sarayi on the throne and starting a new branch of the dynasty. It was taking another woman, and not harem sultan, that broke the camel's back for Ibrahim Pasha's disappointment. Although the mentally ill Hatice would probably forgive him this, as well as the blackened eyes, the ruler could no longer do that. Firstly, it could have been a reason to question Hatice's parenthood. And secondly, it ridiculed the dynasty throughout the Eastern world, which used the same legal systems. On the wedding day, the future husband had a dagger to his throat and swore on it that he would not cheat on his wife, and if he did, he would die. Much has been said about secret communication using handkerchiefs. This thread was introduced by Lady Montagu, but it seems like someone was playing a joke on her. The de Osman family does not confirm this, and in fact, descendants living today deny it. It is known that Haseki, Validae, sultan and blood children had to master sign language. This was the only way to give an order to the chavushas. Haseki. Haseki is not exactly a spouse. In fact, this position was legally sanctioned by Selim Sarayi, because he knew Nurbanu perfectly and knew what she was capable of. He didn't want to marry her, but at the same time, he really only had her. He would never have fought for the throne had it not been for the knowledge that otherwise his children and the Baskedin would die. He paid a huge price for this, because over time Selim struggled with severe depression. His parents really treated him a bit neglectfully. He was the middle child, and as is the case with large families, that the middle child is because is. Suleiman began to notice him towards the end of his life, mainly because he feared Bayezid's love of fighting and vindictiveness. After many years of war, Suleiman wanted the army to no longer be dragged around the world and the peoples of his empire to live in peace. He spent 15 years on war and had enough. Bayezid wanted to feed the Yenicheri, and that was no secret. This was the old man's idealistic vision, because it was impossible not to feed the Yenicheri. Few people remember that Prince Mustafa was removed from the world of the living because he really wanted to start a rebellion, but he also wanted war with Tahmasp, and this was what Suleiman feared the most. A war with Tahmasp would probably mean World War I. Not only would it trigger an ideological war between Sunnis and Shiites, but the growing Mughal Empire would certainly be involved, as Babur has a conflict with Tahmasp, Russia, possibly China. It would be a bloody mess, because the military forces were evenly matched. Suleiman chose the Luciferian greater good. Byzantium under Ottoman rule would have bled to death, even if the war had been won, and not only them. So why is Hafsa said to be the first Haseki? In the case of harem, this is an unjustified term, but the language probably had no other word, because she was the ruler's wife. Hafsa had achieved enormous stature at court and may have never been a Haseki, or was referred to as such, but it was a novelty and no one thought the role would stick. Haseki can do more than Baskedin. These women already have their own assets at their disposal. They influence politics. They can replace the ruler when he is on a military expedition. There is a slight difference between Haseki and consort. It's just a matter of paper. The status of Ottoman women was always different from that of Arab women. Women had the right to own property and make decisions about the use of their assets without the knowledge of male relatives. Among Arabs, this happens with the husband's knowledge. Therefore, harem was able to pay for Mahidevran's life when Suleiman exiled her. Women had access to the courts and could testify as witnesses, although in this case their point of view was treated less reliably. Many documents of court cases brought by women have been preserved. They also served as executors of wills. There was no legal possibility to force a woman to marry, and many women, especially women from noble families, married out of love, although politics and family tradition also crept in. However, this was not imposed by the legal system as in Arab countries, where the spouse was chosen in a cradle. Qasem is an exception here. Despite this, divorces are rare, but there are known cases from legal acts in which a wife left her spouse with nothing, but people more often decide on legal separation. Despoina is the beloved female basilis. Some of them may or may not be basilissa. From the very beginning, who became a basilis was decided by court coteries, and not always people of blood became basilis. We will also call those women who became emperor of Byzantium basilissa. I use the word emperor specifically, not empress, because the office has other prerogatives. In fact, women such as Elizabeth I, Mary Tudor, and Hedwig of Anjou were elected and anointed kings of their countries, although they were colloquially called queens. In Great Britain, over time, it will be officially accepted that the queen has the same prerogatives as the king if she rules the country, and her spouse has no right to the title since Elizabeth Tudor. Basilissa rule in the name of the basilis. The most famous despoina is undoubtedly Theodora, who deserves a separate episode. This author of the Canon of Coquettism, as well as a prayer that most Christians know, the Creed, is an extraordinary story of social advancement from a prostitute of the lowest order, to a basilissa and despoina. Let's not look for Christian virtues in it. This woman was as cruel as no one else in her era. Basilis had a gyneceum, it mean harem. The ruler's relatives and his women also live here. Sometimes as well relatives of despoina. This ruler chooses his wife in a specially prepared competition for maidens, in which every woman in the country can enter. It was called a bride's competition, and the same thing happened in Russian principalities, and then in Tsarist Russia, until the times of Peter the Great, who abolished the practice, although he had a relationship with a woman of easy virtue, and after his death she became the first Tsarina Catherine I. This woman, let's say she was basically a cheap whore following the army. She came from the areas of former Poland. Her organ name was Martha. Peter I is a legend. Primitivism, madness, burning candles in butts for fun are the least of this guy's offenses and the Reformation of Russia, but this woman was not inferior to him, if not worse. He drank everywhere he went and left broken windows, doors and floors behind, and then he didn't pay for it. No wonder they were terrified in London when he came to visit. Peterhof is beautiful, but it was practically renovated once a week, after the Tsar's ball. It was a great event and every woman dreamed of it. The role of basilissa meant becoming the second most important person in the world, but it was also a painful fall. The forgotten monastery. However, it is a chance for enormous social advancement. In fact, quite rarely, women from low social backgrounds became despoines. Most often, these were women who were chosen by a nobleman who wanted to curry favor with the ruler and influence politics. Investments were made in the education of such women and they were taught what to say and how to behave towards the ruler, which could quickly gain his attention. This was the case with Theodora, who was, in a sense, a gift. At least Irena officially won the competition. You could say that the girls' competition was rigged. Basilis may have had 3 women. Over time, one spouse and concubines appeared, and eventually monogamy emerged. In the Orthodox Church, divorce is the norm. However, more than 3 divorces were frowned upon. Several undecided basilisses who had been divorced several times were excommunicated by the patriarchs. The court of the Rus principalities is no different in this matter, but an interesting fact is that when it came to political relationships with members of Byzantine dynasties, these women indicated that the concubines were to be sent away, or that they had priority in the Tiram, and their children would be the heirs to the throne. Moreover, official monogamy entered the Latin world slowly. In fact, we can talk about it somewhere from the middle of the Middle Ages. The largest girls' competition in the history of Russia was the one organized for Prince Vasil by Ivan III the Great. The sad truth is that most of these relationships have failed, and oleandrine reigns supreme. One might even go so far as to say that when two people have something more than love in common, the relationship is successful. One author summed up the lack of understanding between Western and Eastern women long ago. In fact, humans as a species are not monogamous. We are not geese or mandarin ducks given at weddings in China to this day, although parts of the world have tried to convince for centuries. European women wrongly understand that women living in the East are unhappy. He is only an unhappy person who considers himself unlucky and torments his mind with the idea of another state that he cannot have. Eastern women feel a different kind of happiness that they would be equally unhappy if they had what European women call happiness. A woman brought up in a beautiful superstition of the strictest modesty would rather die than show her face. Just like a European woman won't appear at a ball without significant cleavage. This is what a traveler wrote in 1842. Not much has changed in this regard. Eastern women will not be happy, especially nowadays, forced to live in the European fashion. Although Europe, as always, has a problem with understanding otherness, which is largely due to colonialism and the fact that Europe imposed a pattern of behavior, which today creates problems, because these people have problems with defining their culture and who they are. They don't like everything that's mean Western, but they also don't like everything that's Eastern. Sometimes they want this, sometimes that, but it's not possible. The first feminists walk in the East, not the West. And they really fit in perfectly in the brutal world of men. Topkapi or Topkapi. Yeep. Topkapi. In fact, both spellings are pronounced the same in Turkish. I without a dot is pronounced similarly to Y. Currently, in tourist places and guidebooks only the writing with Y is used. However, it does not matter. We always pronounce Topkapi. Part of the Basilisk Palace is the Hagia Sophia. There are minimal ruins there. But in fact nothing left. Gerard Neville went to the Ottoman Empire, fascinated as any romantic, and it was there that romanticism was put out of his mind. He bought a house, but he wanted an unmarried woman. He came up with a Coptic wedding, with the possibility of divorce, provided he paid the woman a sum of money. Then Muslim marriage for an hour, i.e. with divorce after 3 times saying, "I divorce with you," and wanted to leave the country. Here we must distinguish something that European women catch themselves in, thinking that they have got married when they have not. A wedding in Islam means writing a document that includes all the activities that both parties are to perform. From taking out the garbage to the frequency of sexual intercourse. This document is valid for divorce. Here the wife also indicates whether she agrees to a second wife or not. If one of the parties breaks these rules, it is grounds for divorce, and the woman may even request corporal punishment for her husband and lover. Prostitution officially does not exist in Islam, because you can get married for an hour with 3x notice, "I am divorcing you." Such a vow is given before the imam and only serves one thing: having sex legally. This relationship is not about anything else, and it is not really a wedding for the Muslim mentality. This is legal prostitution. Gerard wanted the announcement and knowledge not to reach France. He was a bigamist. However, he didn't really understand the relationship which he was looking for. As soon as he found a matchmaker, they started building him a gazebo. He didn't want her because he believed that his wife should show herself. Did not help. When he finally discovered how expensive marriage is in Islam and the risk of betrayal, he gave up the marriage, but this meant leaving Cairo, and he did not want that. Sly friends advised him to find a slave. And so it happened, but the gentleman didn't listen too much to what the merchant was talking about, and he had even less idea about words such as odalisque or cadon, because as a Frenchman he had a distorted vision of this part of the world. And here the problem appeared again. While he could have stayed in the city, he was completely unaware of the customs and did not know when to tell the slave to cover her face, and she demanded it of him. What's worse, the lady didn't bother to cook, but he took her for washing, cooking and cleaning. When he ordered her that, the lady rightly announced that she was a cadon, not an odalisque, meaning a cleaner, and did not do housework. The outrage was so great that the lady said she would write to the sheikh. After all, the guy had to buy dresses, servants, and gave her money. The sheikh finally looks. Desperate for money, Gerard decided to free the woman. He began to explain to her how difficult her fate was, and that's why he decided to free her from these shackles. The woman ordered him to sell her. The man began to praise the freedom of European women. The woman replied directly, "Why should I earn a living? I don't want to earn a living, I don't have to be able to do anything." The magic broke when Gerard said that since she was a slave, she could earn money as a maid. Zainab replied that it was unworthy of her position, and besides, if he sold her, there was a chance that she would end up with a rich sheikh and achieve a life of prosperity, as well as power that no one had ever had, without doing anything disgraceful. Excellent story. Gerard almost dropped dead. Eventually, he fled the country, European style. Gerard could also be a modern Frenchman. It is amazing that despite centuries, all colonialists have not learned anything, and what's worse, they still consider their lifestyle to be the only right one. The emancipation of European women is not a liberation in the eyes of Eastern women. European women will certainly not be aware of how enslaved they have become, although this was not the intention of their first emancipators. European women have become objects, reduced to sex and making money, giving birth to children, cleaning women, cooks, and household accountants. At the same time, they cannot reconcile all the roles they have imposed on themselves, because they cannot be reconciled. A slave can have a better life than a free man who is in fact unfree. Old proverb. Even those overseas tried to convince us that they were bringing us freedom with their colonialism in the so-called Islamic revolutions, which were only created by demons. Meanwhile, there was this freedom. The first feminists came from the harem. In this part of the world, women have always inherited property and been literate. In Europe, even queens will sign documents by crosses for a long time, and women will not inherit property until the 19th century. In some countries this will change during World War II. That's a long time. Their husbands inherit.